Welcome everyone once again. My name is Krishna Avila and I'm a staff attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, pronouns he, him. We know that many of you have a lot of questions about DACA and what's going on and what's the timeline for the program. Today we're going to answer a lot of those questions and give you a wealth of information about ways that you can think about not being dependent on this program. We know that it's been, since day one, it's been vulnerable. So we want to make sure that you all know how you can earn a living and live life without DACA. Today, I'm also joined by my colleagues at Immigrants Rising. We decided to split the webinar today in two segments. In the first hour, we'll go over the status of DACA, give a quick overview of some of the permanent forms of immigration benefits out there. We'll also discuss the importance of traveling on advance parole and provide some tips and suggestions to get you all prepared for that if you haven't traveled already. And then the second hour, we'll hand it over to Immigrants Rising to provide us with some great information on how you can earn a living outside of DACA. So we know that there's the undocu hustle out there of folks that are thriving and not being dependent on the work authorization that DACA gives folks. So with that, maybe we can just go around quickly and introduce ourselves. If we all want to say our names, titles, pronouns, and organizations, and then also what you're looking forward to for this webinar. So we can do this popcorn style. So maybe Michaela, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I'm Michaela Kallenberger. I am a law clerk at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm going to popcorn it to Gracie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gracie, they, them. I'm also a law student and law clerk with the ILRC. And I'm really excited to just have some interactive moments with everyone in the audience today. I'll popcorn it to Ileana.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm Ileana Perez, and I serve as the Director of Research and Entrepreneurship with Immigrants Rising. And I'm very excited to share with you all some information about ways to generate income through entrepreneurship. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Estefania.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Estefania Hermosillo, and I'm Seed Grant Manager. And I'm really looking forward to myself learning a lot and then also sharing more about our seed grant that we have here at Immigrants Rising.
Great. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. I'm guessing that you all can see my screen. That's usually a common question before we start. So yeah, it sounds like we can see the screen. So before we get started, let's just go over some logistics. First, as you probably already are aware, everyone's muted for this webinar. So unfortunately, because there's a lot of you out there, you won't be able to speak verbally. But that being said, we're going to make this interactive. One of the things that we encourage you all to do is to ask questions. If you see on this slide, there is a way for you to ask questions through Zoom. On the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A button. And so we encourage you to use that whenever you have a question. We're going to answer questions throughout the presentation. And then at the end, if we have time, we're going to answer some of those verbally as well. You'll also be getting some polls throughout the presentation to allow this presentation to be more interactive. So you're going to get some questions and you'll see that those polls throughout the presentation. And then lastly, like I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded. So no worries about whether you're taking notes, no need to take extensive notes. You'll get a chance to receive a recording of this presentation after today. So with that, yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, just wanted to introduce you to our organization, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Some of you may already be familiar with us. For those of you who are new, we're basically an immigration law and immigration rights organization. We focus on three main areas. First, we build capacity out in the immigration legal field. As a national organization, we train attorneys, paralegals, district attorneys, judges, and community members on what's going on with immigration law. Second, we also do policy advocacy. So that means we're involved in passing new laws, changing existing laws on various levels. So the federal level, state level, and on a local level. And of course, those laws have to do with protecting and advancing the rights of immigrants. And then lastly, we also partner directly with grassroots immigrant communities and doing all this work. So let's jump right in. So for the first segment, as I mentioned, the webinar is being split into two parts. So the first hour, it's all about what's going on with DACA, give you all some updates and timeline on how we think the program is going. Then we'll talk about some different permanent options that you should be thinking of. We know that DACA is not permanent, it's vulnerable, so we want to make sure that you're aware that there are other more permanent immigration laws out there that can help you gain a more permanent status. Then we'll switch gears to talking specifically about traveling on advance parole. And if you haven't done that already, we want to make sure that you all do that. And the reason why is because in the last section, we'll talk about there are some benefits to being able to leave and come back on advance parole. So yeah, let's jump in. So let's talk about the DACA litigation and what's happening there. So some of you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, didn't we already decide this? And the Supreme Court, why are we still litigating this? So we want to just make sure that we understand that the Supreme Court and the case that was decided in 2020, if you all remember, was all about Trump. And if you all remember, Trump tried to terminate DACA. And then basically what happened after that was advocates sued the Trump administration and argued that the way Trump had terminated the program was unlawful. So then that case made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court had agreed. They said that Trump, the way it terminated the program was unlawful. Fast forward to the Biden administration, and now we have a new whole set of different litigations. This time, this litigation, Texas versus United States, it's different because the state of Texas and other states are suing the government and are basically arguing that DACA itself, as it was created in 2012 by the Obama administration, is unlawful. So it's not talking about how Trump had terminated it. It's going directly at the program, and it's arguing that that DACA is unlawful. So where are we with this lawsuit, with this new lawsuit? So some of you may have remembered that in 2021, a court basically in Texas had agreed that DACA was unlawful. The difference is that back then they were analyzing whether the memo that Obama had written, which is on your screen, you can see we call it the DACA Napolitano memo. She was the secretary back in the Obama administration. That basically that memo, which created DACA, was unlawful. So the court had agreed. It basically after that prevented the government from continuing to administer the program, but because the advocates had appealed the decision, it said, okay, fine, if you're going to appeal the decision, I also recognize that so many people have come to rely on DACA. Thousands of people have been applying. So while the appeal is ongoing, I'm going to stay the decision to allow those folks to continue renewing. So that's basically what happened. The court said the memo was unlawful. And while the appeal was ongoing, it was going to allow for renewals to continue. It also gave the decision back to the government. So it said, hey, I'm going to give you a chance to fix some issues and then to come back to me. So basically, that's what had happened. And once again, this decision was appealed to the Fifth Circuit. So the Fifth Circuit then was taking over the case. So what happened meanwhile, while the Fifth Circuit was deciding whether the lower court was correct or not? Well, many of you know that the government basically published a DACA rule. So this is different. This is something that's not the memo that Obama had originally implemented. It's a whole new rule. And so on August 30th of 2022, DHS published this DACA rule. If you all remember, this rule was the one where people were submitting comments to the government, and then the government reviewed all those comments before publishing the final rule. So what it does, this new DACA rule, is that it basically codifies DACA. And what that means is that whereas before we only had one memo, basically a letter, just by the Obama administration saying, hey, we're going to create DACA. Now we actually have laws. We have specific laws that we can cite to. So it's not the memo. It's not relying on the memo. It's more thorough. So that's kind of the difference. So what ended up happening after the DACA rule was published was that the Fifth Circuit had came out with a decision, and it said, hey, we do agree that this memo that Obama had created is unlawful, but we also recognize that this new rule is in place. And because that's not what we are looking at, we need to give the decision back to the lower court so that the lower court can decide whether this new rule is also unlawful or not. So that's kind of where we're at. That's kind of the gist of it, that right now it's at the lower court. And the lower court, remember, it first had already decided that the memo was unlawful. So now it's kind of deciding whether this rule is unlawful or not. So what's the timeline with the decision with this lower court? So right now we're expecting a decision sometime after April 6th of this year. So that's coming soon. That's in a few weeks. It doesn't mean that a decision is going to come out that day. It just means that we're expecting a decision after that date. Why that after that date? Well, it was because the judge in this case basically gave a timeline to the parties who are suing, and they said, hey, this is the deadline for you all to submit the final arguments in your case. And then after that, I'm going to decide based on those arguments. We don't know when that decision could happen. It could happen any time, like a few weeks after, it could happen months, but we know that it's going to happen after April 6th. After that decision, however, we're basically back to where we were before, where we can appeal once again, because remember, this is now all about the rule, which was not decided before. So after this decision, the parties can appeal back to the Fifth Circuit, or they can appeal directly to the Supreme Court. So that's good to keep in mind as we think about, a certain deadline for when DACA might be terminated or not. So what's next? So if and when DACA is terminated, something also to keep in mind is that Texas is actually arguing that the program should be terminated 2 years from the decision. So it's arguing there, and it's telling the judge like, hey, we're suing and we're saying that DACA is unlawful, but we're also agreeing that, there should be some time to wind down the program. And we're asking the judge to give 2 years from whenever it decides, if it decides to terminate the program, to at least give 2 years from the date of the decision to wind the program down. So what this means is that this would allow, most likely, to have folks continue to have their DACA until it expires. So that means that most likely, even if there's a termination down the line, and again, we don't know when that would happen because they can appeal the decision once again. But whenever termination is final, we're hoping that the person can at least continue to have their DACA until it expires. And also for traveling on advance parole, it's good to know that if you're traveling, like most likely you won't have to be worried about DACA ending while you're abroad. You can continue to travel and come back most likely if this is the way the judge decides. So I mentioned this DACA rule, and I mentioned that it's different from the Obama memo, which was basically a letter just creating the program. So what else does this DACA rule do? So it's important to once again keep in mind that it basically replaces that letter, and now we have like actual like statutes that we can cite to when we're doing DACA applications and things like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't do much else. It keeps the same DACA requirements. Before the DACA rule was published, a lot of advocates were telling the government that they should try to expand the program and allow other people to be eligible for it. But unfortunately, the government didn't agree, and it just kept the same DACA requirements. So not much changed there. Some things to keep in mind, some good things is that right now, if the government tries to terminate a person's DACA, before it was the case that the government had the ability to just end it, just notify the person, hey, we're gonna end your DACA. Most of the time it was because they found out that a person had been convicted of a certain crime that makes them ineligible for DACA, for example. So they found out on their own and they just gave a notice to the person like, hey, we're terminating your DACA. We just found out you got convicted for this crime that makes you ineligible for DACA. So we're just going to terminate it. But now with this DACA rule, this new DACA rule, the government actually has to give you notice. So they first have to give everyone notice if they want to terminate their DACA, and let them know like, hey, we're going to terminate your DACA for these cases, for these reasons. And it gives the person a chance to argue back and say, hey, I actually did not get convicted for this, so I should still keep DACA, for example. So it's a good thing. It's an extra layer of protection. Those are called notice of intent to terminate, so that those have to be provided in all cases. Also important to keep in mind that it continues to protect your information so that the information is not shared with ICE. Of course, there's exceptions, national security exceptions. If a person thinks that you are committing terrorist kind of activities, fraud, things like that, then in those cases, then they have the discretion to share with ICE. But generally speaking, the government is saying that they're not actively sharing information about DACA recipients with ICE. So that's good to know. Also, for certain people with convictions, with criminal convictions, we're not going to go into too much detail today, but it's good to know that it keeps the same protections in place in terms of expungement convictions. And that's basically a fancy word to say that certain states allow you to go back, even if you were convicted, to erase your record. So you can go back using state criminal proceedings to erase your conviction. So that's good because for DACA, if you have an expunged conviction, meaning a corrected conviction on your criminal record, you can still continue to be eligible for DACA. So yeah, where are we right now in terms of eligibility? So right now, unfortunately, once again, the administration, at least until the appeal continues and the litigation continues, they're only accepting, processing, and granting DACA renewals. That means that if you're eligible for renewal, you should be submitting those. And that means anyone who has a current DACA case or anyone whose DACA expired less than a year ago. those people can continue submitting and they will be continuing to grant those. So unfortunately, that also means that, yeah, don't let your DACA expire for more than for a year or more, because those will not be counted. So you'll be surprised. I still hear people who didn't keep track and then they let their DACA expired, and now it's been over a year. And unfortunately, they're out of luck, at least for now, until we settle the litigation. So when should you be submitting those renewals? So if your DACA expires 6 months from now, renew ASAP. Luckily, right now, from what we're hearing, it's not taking too long to process those DACA renewals. So we're actually seeing, in some cases, weeks from when you submit your renewal until you are approved. So it's not taking too long. We were hearing backlogs during the beginning of the Biden administration, but that's not what we're hearing now. So generally speaking, it shouldn't be taking that long, but you want to avoid anything that could happen in the future. So once again, if your DACA is expiring within 6 months, apply as soon as you can, just in case. If your DACA expires 6 months to a year, you can consider renewing, but you would be receiving less time with your DACA. So that's something to keep in mind. The suggested time is within 6 months, but if you are submitting beyond that, you would just be receiving less time on your work authorization and your DACA. All right, so now we're going to switch to talk about permanent options. And I see that there's quite a few questions in the queue. Like I said, after this presentation, I'm going to go through those and answer to you directly. And then at the end, we'll say some of those out loud if we have time. So yeah, let's talk about permanent options. So once again, we know DACA is vulnerable. We knew it since the beginning. Many of us were fighting for DACA to happen, or actually we were fighting for the Obama administration to do something. And DACA is what he gave us. So when he gave us DACA, a lot of us were like, no, this is not enough. This is vulnerable. It could get taken away by a new administration. And sure enough, that's exactly what has happened over the past few years. So we want to make sure that you all are aware that there are more permanent options out there for you all to analyze with an attorney to see if you're eligible for them. A statistic an important statistic that we always like to throw out there is that we have seen that about a quarter of DACA eligible people are eligible for something more permanent. So once again, it's important for you all to talk to an immigration attorney or practitioner to see if you're eligible for something. And we recommend you to do this every few years. Don't just do it one time. Continue to do this every so often. Just like you go to a doctor every so often to get checked up, you should be treating attorneys that way, because immigration law is always changing. There's always something new. Your circumstances could change. So we suggest that you do consultations every few years at the very least, so that you can see if you're eligible for something. Just to name a few common forms of relief, and by relief, we mean immigration statuses. There are many out there, but these are just some of the most common ones. Number one, employment-based permanent residency. So that means that there are avenues for some people to get a green card through their employer. And I know Immigrants Rising is they're actually having a webinar tomorrow on this. So tune into that to learn more about ways that your employer can sponsor you to get a green card. We obviously don't have time to go over all the eligibility criteria for these. So these are just to show you that these are options that some people could be eligible for. But yeah, there are ways that your employer could sponsor you so that you can get a green card in that way. Also, the most common one that many people have heard of is marriage to US citizen, especially. If you're adjusting your status, and we'll talk about what that means later in the presentation, but that's another common form to be able to receive your green card. Adjustment of status through VAWA. So that VAWA stands for Violence Against Women Act. That is a law that allows certain victims of who are being battered, or there's something happening in the family where they can adjust their status if they're being a victim of that kind of issues in their families. Also family-based petitions and consular processing. So we know that families can also certain family members can also sponsor you to get a green card. And then some of you may be able to do what's called consular processing. And that is the ability to get your green card going outside of the United States. Generally speaking, we don't recommend that, but I think for some of you, you might actually be eligible to do that without having any problems. And then once again, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, the difference between adjustment of status and consular processing. U visas for victims of crimes. This is also another common form of immigration benefit. And this is for folks who are victims of certain serious crimes inside of the United States. The most important part there is that you are helping law enforcement and you're cooperating with letting law enforcement investigate and see what's happening with that crime. So one of the main ways to do that is to just simply report that something is happening to you, or that you're seeing something very severe. Maybe in some cases you were a bystander and it caused you so much trauma that that you could also be eligible for a U visa. Asylum is another common form of remedy, where if you're fearing persecution from the country that you're coming from, maybe something happened to you or your family, and if you go back there, then you know that something's going to happen to you. Well, asylum could be a form of relief for you. And then lastly, we also know that many of you had parents who maybe you weren't petitioned for directly, but we know that, for example, a long time ago, your parents were, and you don't even know if you were included in that application. It's an application that's been there for a long time, and now you're just, heck, guess what? You're protected under that application, even though you weren't listed. So once again, I mean, this is just one slide. We're not going to go into detail into to the eligibility criteria for all of these. This is for you to go and talk to an attorney, but these are just some just an overview of some of the common forms of relief. So this is just a slide on some questions that you can be asking yourself to maybe try to guess if you're eligible for these. But for asylum, you want to be asking, are you afraid of returning to your home country? Questions like, was your family hurt in their home country? Were you hurt at some point when you were there? Just to get the analysis started and maybe flag for an attorney to dig deeper. For U visas, once again, have you been a victim of a crime inside of the United States? And did you report the crime to the police? And if you haven't already, like especially if it hasn't been too long, you can still report it. There's no time limit on when the crime happened. So you could be eligible for a U visa. For VAWA, once again, have you been hurt by a family member who's a lawful permanent resident? So meaning someone who has a green card or a US citizen. That could be helpful in terms of assessing whether you're eligible for adjustment of status under VAWA. And then lastly, or before employment base is, which we'll spend a lot of time on, is Advance Parole. Did you travel on Advance Parole? And do you have an immediate relative who can apply for you? And we'll talk about that at the end of this presentation. But if so, then you can be eligible for adjustment of status. And then lastly, yeah, can you find an employer to sponsor you for a green card? And once again, tomorrow, Immigrants Rising will have a webinar just dedicated just solely on employment-based petitions. I think since we're running out of time, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleagues to get us started on traveling on Advance Parole.
Cool. Thanks, Krishna. I'm Michaela again.
And I'm Gracie, and we are going to be presenting for about 20 more minutes for you guys.
Yeah, so why don't we go into the overview of Advance Parole and traveling. So there are a lot of resources out there about how to apply to Advance Parole, but in this presentation, we will be focusing on re-entering after you have your Advance Parole document and sharing some tips to make that transition as smooth as possible. We are here to encourage you to apply and travel with Advance Parole, as traveling with Advance Parole is a great way to widen your horizons, and there's also an opportunity for your lawful reentry to enable you to adjust to permanent status later on, which we will touch on, but Krishna will go through more in depth. And so here is the agenda of what we'll be talking about. We'll be going through what Advance Parole even is, the benefits and things to consider, some supporting documents to bring upon re-entry into the United States. What is this term of secondary inspection? Some tips for preparing for re-entry, and we'll also put in some check-ins along the way. So first, you can utilize your poll function in the Zoom, and we just want to know, have you heard of Advance Parole? We'll give you about 20-ish seconds to answer.
Feel free to also put your answers in the chat if you want, but we figured since there's so many of you, better to just do a poll, and then we'll share out the responses.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of you know what it is, which is really exciting. So hopefully our presentation will encourage you to use it or to apply for it if you haven't already. And for those that don't know anything or have heard very little, we hope you understand a little bit more of what Advance Parole is. So what is Advance Parole? Advance Parole is a way for people in the United States with DACA to request advance permission to travel abroad for educational, employment, or humanitarian reasons. And these three terms and three reasons are very broad, which is where we can sort of get creative on to what these kind of reasons can be. And so some examples of educational are going to study abroad. An example of employment is attending a job conference outside the country. And lastly, an example of humanitarian reason is visiting a sick or dying family member. And these requests are reviewed and granted by the USCIS office. So we wanted to do another poll. How does traveling on Advance Parole make you feel?
About 7 more seconds to put in your answer, or just think to yourself.
Okay, so it sounds like we might have some nerves going on about the Advance Parole, situation, which is totally normal. Hopefully we can give you some confidence. And it's also important to emphasize that people with DACA have successfully re-entered with Advance Parole. So we can talk about the benefits. So first, if you travel with Advance Parole and re-enter the United States, that will count as a lawful entry on your passport, and a lawful entry is required for you to adjust your status later on. So getting that lawful entry may help to achieve some permanent status, which again, Krishna will touch on this later on, but it's a really great benefit of Advance Parole. Also, a great benefit is gaining new experiences that, you can visit family, study abroad, attend a job conference, the examples that we listed before. You can experience what life is like outside the United States. And many people with DACA have successfully traveled on advance parole and returned to the United States, so it is possible. And many people have reported even a widening of their perspective and feeling freer with the United States. And so that being said, here is Jesus, a small video of Jesus from Immigrants Rising sharing his story.
For me, when I came back to the country, to the US, after having experienced just this whole awakening of just who I was and everything like that, I felt much more free, and I just got rid of this weight that was just on me. And then I started to open up a lot more in the US. I started to seek more opportunities.
So if you want to learn more and even view some of these other stories, you can go to the Immigrants Rising page. I list some stories and resources.
All right. So yeah, I love to see everyone sharing resources in the chat, and we have a lot of questions, but I know we're keeping track of those so that hopefully we can answer all of them at some point. I am going to go over just a couple more things to consider, and then we'll show you one more website, one more video with some audio of somebody who's been through Advance Parole. This is from the Immigrants Rising Advance Parole Travel Guide. So that you'll have that URL in a couple slides. So a couple more things to consider. It is a lot of paperwork, so give yourself time and just be patient with yourself as you go through all that. There is a cost. It's $575 with Form I-512. So you just want to take the time to prepare and plan your trip really carefully. And as we've been going through earlier in the presentation with Krishna, staying informed on the status of DACA will be really important for planning the dates of your trip. Another thing we're going to just talk about, because it is a reality, is that Border Patrol agents can be intimidating when you're coming back through the border when you're returning from your travel. But if you prepare everything and make sure that your dates are set and that you have everything prepped with your attorney beforehand, it is very common for everything to go really smooth. And as long as you have that all figured out, it should be fine. Technically, advance parole is a request to re-enter, not guaranteed re-entry. So the CBP officers will conduct an inquiry to ensure that you're eligible to re-enter at the border, which is through a process called secondary inspection, which we will be going through in a couple of slides. And again, very normal, very common process for people with DACA who are traveling. Here we just have a couple links of some legal resources to attorneys that you can check out if you need to consult with an immigration attorney, which is definitely something you want to do before traveling to make sure that nothing in your record will prevent you from returning to the United States. And you're going to figure all of this out before you even leave. And lastly, we just want to acknowledge that returning back to the United States can be a bit of a shock. As Jesus said, it was a mind-opening experience, but with your perspective being changed, it might be difficult to relate to others or share your story. So feel free to tell your story on your own time and seek out support systems. And so we have one more video that's just a little bit more of the reality of coming back through the airport.
On the plane back home, of course, I was a total nerve wreck. Can I come back in? Can I not come back in? We flew straight into SFO. That way, if I got detained at SFO, as opposed to in LA or somewhere that's not my hometown, since I live in the Bay Area. So that was one precaution that we took. Also, my lawyer sort of gave me the heads up that when you come in through advance parole, it is very common for them to flag you for what's called secondary inspection. So once I went up to the podium, they flagged me for secondary inspection and I proceeded to a room. And that's where my husband and I got separated because he couldn't come with me. So I think knowing that really helped me sort of prepare because I did a couple things. One, I made sure I used the restroom like the last second I could before we landed, knowing I know how many hours I was going to be there. Two, I had snacks with me, and I also made sure I had a little bit of cash in case I needed to buy anything. Like I don't know, I didn't know what to expect, but I just had like $100. I was there for about 2 hours, and it was sort of it's a very detention like feel back there. So I think just being aware that that was going to happen helped me not freak out. And yeah, I just answered their questions, and they proceeded me to let me, go through.
So yeah, as some people have been sharing in the chat, sometimes the officers can be really intimidating. That's why we recommend sharing stories and being really mindful of which airport you come back through. And a great place to hear some more firsthand experiences like that is the website that is on the screen right now. There's a lot more videos and audio and just like tips about how to get through. But again, it's very streamlined process, and you're likely to be very successful going through. So next slide, please. Okay, let's bring the energy back up again. We want to know, if you could travel anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would you go? And if your place is not on this poll, go ahead and write it in the chat. Wow, pretty good mix. Pretty good mix. Give you 5 more seconds. Okay, looks like everyone wants to go to Europe, Central America, and outer space, which is definitely my pick. All right, next slide.
Well, so here are some supporting documents to bring upon re-entry into the United States. Making sure you have a passport when re-entering is especially important because a customs officer will likely be stamping this, proving that you have entered the US lawfully, which again can be used to adjust your status later on. You also want to bring your advance parole document and a copy of your DACA approval notice, making sure that your DACA status will still be valid within the time you are traveling. And on the last bullet for the left side, you also want to bring your EAD card.
Additionally, you want to bring your state ID, driver's license if you have one, as well as your relevant medical documents, including your COVID immunization records or an attestation saying that you've been vaccinated. And if applicable, we recommend having your attorney's contact information while you're returning back home, and also giving that information to your family or support system that might be in the United States, so that they might know when you're traveling and they can have that information in case they need to call and ask any questions. And lastly, we recommend having evidence for the reason of your trip abroad. So we want to emphasize that these are the 3 reasons why you can apply for advance parole, but there's room to get creative. And so having evidence, like if you're traveling for humanitarian or family reasons, a birth certificate showing you're tied to that relative, or if you're traveling for educational reasons, a copy of your enrollment documents, and if you're traveling for employment reasons, a letter from your employer, or your business contract, or a registration form for a conference that you might be attending. Next slide. So as we mentioned, we're really here to just encourage you to go on advance parole and introduce you to some of the things to be aware of when you're actually returning from advance parole. But if you are looking for more advice on how to apply, there is a lot more comprehensive resources out there. For example, this link here, which will go through a little bit more of how you can qualify for one of those 3 reasons, how to apply, how you could do an urgent request, and how it will affect your immigration options if your application is rejected. Okay, and here we have another poll. We are curious to know how much people know about secondary inspection. Okay, very interesting. I'm going to stop it right here. This is almost a totally even split. So we really want to introduce you to secondary inspection and just give you a little overview so that you're aware of what will happen when you're coming back through the port of entry after traveling. So when you're returning back, there is a thing called initial inspection, where CBP officers will determine whether admissible by reviewing all your documents, usually at the customs desk. And then there is another thing called secondary inspection, which is a separate process where CBP officers conduct further verification of your documents and may or may not do additional questioning in a different room that is separate from the customs desk. And the purpose of this is just to verify your criminal and immigration background and make sure you're eligible to re-enter. It's really common for people with DACA to go through this process, and it's also very common for them to get through and super normal. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a little bit more about how it works. Yeah, can't emphasize enough. It is common for people to go through it, and don't assume that if you are getting taken to a room that they're not telling you where you're going, that's something to be worried about. You're going to be prepared and you're going to have all of your stuff with you. So the length of time that you'll spend there could vary, as well as whether or not you're able to use your phone. So be prepared in case that happens. And it's just important to know that the officers have discretion to decide who goes. It could be random selection. It could be something in your documents or your background. You really won't know. So it's better to be prepared and assume that you are going to go through this. They may ask you questions, and that's also something that you can prepare for by watching videos or consulting your attorney beforehand and going through some of those questions they might ask you.
So here are some tips to prepare for reentry that we've gathered from DACA recipients who have traveled and returned with Advance Parole. First, try your best to stay calm and confident throughout the process. Speaking with immigration officers might sound scary. This especially is true if you're confronted by officers who are intimidating. Remember that if you have taken the proper steps to prepare, you should be able to return if you're eligible. Talking to an attorney to address risks in traveling may be helpful. Speaking to an attorney or legal representative prior to leaving the United States is especially important for persons who have ever been arrested by law enforcement or have had any interaction with immigration officers. Because secondary inspection can take 30 minutes to several hours, it may be best to give yourself a lot of time in between connecting flights, or even just to try and get a direct flight. Contacting a family member or loved one may be helpful just to make sure they know your travel plans and when and how to contact you.
So you want to bring all the supporting documents that we mentioned before. Also be mindful of DACA's expiration or possible termination and stay up to date with that. Have your COVID-19 documentation. Also, avoid having anything that might be condemning evidence in your personal belongings. So as we said, it's very rare. However, the officers do have the jurisdiction to search you in your phone. So just be aware of what's on there. It's, again, very rare for that to happen, but just so that you can be extra prepared. And lastly, just transitioning back to the United States, be aware that you might have changed perspectives and that there is a support system out there of people who have also been through this and who want to share their stories. I see it a lot in the chat right now, and it's really inspiring to see everyone sharing resources and sharing stories here. So keep that up for when you go on your own trip. And yeah, so we do have one more poll to put up. Before we put it up, I just want to emphasize that Many people have gone on advance parole, and we've gathered this information through anecdotal evidence and many years of hearing people's stories. And it is very doable. As long as you're prepared, you will be successful. So we want to ask you one more time how you are feeling about traveling on advance parole. And I'll give it a couple more seconds. And we are seeing all of your questions. I think there's almost 70 questions in the Q&A. So we'll find a way to answer those as we go. But here, I'll share our responses. So it looks like a little bit less of you said nervous. So that means we've at least encouraged a couple of you to go on advance parole and to travel and have that pathway to adjusting your status. So that means our job here is partially done, but there's always more encouragement to go around. So yeah, I hope that you learned a little bit from this presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Gracie and Michaela. So in the last 6 minutes, I'm just gonna quickly talk about the benefit of traveling on advance parole. One of the biggest benefits is being able to adjust your status. And so what does that mean? So that means that adjustment of status basically means being able to receive your green card inside of the United States and completing the process here instead of going to a consulate outside of the country, which is called consular processing. Basically, for a lot of people who has basically been inside the country and has accrued on what's called unlawful presence, meaning that you haven't had DACA, you hadn't had any other status. If you basically are in that position for more than 180 days, once you leave the country, it's a problem without advance parole. We're not talking about advance parole. We're talking about people who lead to consular process without advance parole. They trigger what's called a 3 or 10 year bar. So that means that they're barred from re-entering the country for up to 10 years. So we definitely, when you're applying for a green card, we want to make sure that you're eligible for adjustment of status instead of having to go through consular processing. So how are you eligible for adjustment of status? There's basically two main ways. The first way is that you're eligible for what's called 245I, and that is for people who were beneficiaries of a petition that was filed on or before April 30th of 2001. So many of you might not even know that you're 245I eligible. Maybe your parents had a petition filed for them back in the day, and you were a child. You could be eligible for 245I. If not, then the other most common one is 245A. So that is where persons who are what's called inspected and admitted or paroled. So that's a huge thing to keep in mind, that people who are traveling on advance parole and are re-entering the country are considered to be paroled. So if you're paroled, you meet this 245A eligibility criteria. So unfortunately, that's not the only requirement under 245A. That's only the first requirement to be paroled. If you have work without authorization, you're not eligible. If you don't have a lawful immigration status at the time you're applying for adjustment, you're not eligible. But a huge exception is for immediate relatives. So if you've worked without authorization, or even if you don't have an immigration status later down the line, if you have an immediate relative who's applying for you, you don't have to worry about that. So who is an immediate relative? Basically spouses of US citizens, unmarried children under 21 of a US citizen, a parent of a US citizen. So if any of those are applying for you and you've been paroled inside of the country, that means you're eligible for adjustment of status most likely. So That's why it's a big deal. Travel if you can, get that parole entry, especially for those of you who entered the country originally without authorization by crossing the border. You know, you want to make sure that you have that lawful entry. So very important to do. And once again, especially if DACA ends later down the line, you want to make sure that you travel on advance parole. Once again, it could be scary, but we know many, many, many people who have done it. It's something that so many people have shared their stories. The only people who I know I just know like maybe 2 or 3 people who were stuck outside of the country. And that is because either one, they left without applying for advance parole, or two, they didn't realize that their advance parole time had expired. So they waited until the very last minute to book their flight back to the United States, and something happened with that flight. And then they were stuck because they were outside of the country for more than what their advance parole requirement allowed. So just make sure to apply for advance parole, and that you give yourself enough time, and to talk to an attorney like Gracie and Michaela was mentioning before you go, especially if you've been in contact with law enforcement and immigration officers. So yeah, so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and go through the questions right now and answer them. But yeah, I'll hand it back over to Immigrants Rising to get us started with the second half of the presentation.
Thank you very much to everybody at the ILRC for sharing such valuable information. Really appreciate it. And we have been keeping track of the questions that have been coming in the chat. And then I believe the ILRC team is going to be replying to some of the questions that came in the Q&A. So thank you everybody for joining us and sticking around. In this second part of this webinar, I am going to be going over information about ways to generate income through entrepreneurship. And here we go. So this part, again, we will be talking about ways to generate income, and I will be joined by my colleague Estefania, who is going to be sharing a little bit more about the seed grant. But hello, everybody. Again, if you just tuned in, I am Ileana Perez, and I'm the Director of Research and Entrepreneurship with Immigrants Rising. I have been with the organization for about a decade, developing resources and information to inform the immigrant community about ways to make money through entrepreneurship. And I'm very excited to be here again with my colleague Estefania, who has also been part of Immigrants Rising for several years, and just recently shifted over to work with us on the SEED initiative. And Estefania, would you like to share a few words?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Ileana. I'm excited. For the SEED initiative. We're launch ready as of today, which is really exciting. I'll definitely share more with you all later today. And the opportunity of entrepreneurship for students, for undocumented folks, is something that Ileana has advocated for a long time. And I've had a shift myself in how I saw entrepreneurship. And so being able to think of myself, yourselves, many people here as people who can run our own businesses, start to maximize so many of our skill sets in another way versus thinking only employee-based, is so much at the core of the SEED initiative and this fund and this grant that we have. So I'm just really happy to be here and to share more about this, and to open up all of our eyes further into what's possible with entrepreneurship for our community.
Thank you very much, Estefania. And so to get started here, for those of you that may not be familiar with us, we are Immigrants Rising, and we have been around for over 15 years. And even though today's focus is going to be on generating income through entrepreneurship, we definitely encourage you to check out our website. We have many more resources that you can see here, including information about how to go to college in California, how to get more information around legal information. We have lots of very exciting mental health information and resources as well. So again, definitely encourage you to check out everything we have to offer at immigrantsrising.org. And so for today's presentation, I'm going to try to speak for about 45 minutes. And the purpose is to equip you all with knowledge and resources to learn about income generation through entrepreneurship. And we know that this is definitely a question that comes up both for DACA recipients who may be afraid of losing their work authorization, but really it's also important information for individuals who may be undocumented without work authorization to also learn about the possibilities that exist to be able to generate income. And it really is impossible to cover everything in detail. So I really do encourage you all to check out all of our entrepreneurship resources that you can find on immigrantsrising.org/making-money. And we'll reference several resources and links throughout the presentation. And so in the agenda, today I'm going to cover a brief introduction around entrepreneurship, where I'll talk a little bit about why entrepreneurship is specifically different from employment. Super briefly, I'll talk about the ITIN, Social Security number, and taxes. I'll spend quite a bit of time walking through how to get started with entrepreneurship. And for those of you joining us in California, I'll share a little bit about some policies and initiatives. Then I'll hand it over to Estefania, who will share a little bit more about our SEED initiative, and we'll end with some information and resources. Well, I definitely encourage you all to add your questions in the Q&A, and Estefania will also be adding links and answering any questions in the chat. And then just to quickly reiterate that the recording of this webinar, as well as many other resources related to DACA, are available on our website. And so we just actually wrapped up a separate webinar series that talked about also some legal options, some mental health resources, information about entrepreneurship, including a panel of entrepreneurs that was part of that. And there was also a segment around higher education. So I encourage you to check out this page. Everybody who registered for this webinar is going to get a follow-up email that will include links to this page as well as ILRC's DACA page. So why entrepreneurship? So we know that immigration status is a barrier to employment because unfortunately undocumented individuals do not have access to work authorization or social security number. But it's not the only barrier to employment. There are many other barriers to employment that exist. And this is the reason why it's important to think about other ways to be able to generate income. There's also lots of benefits to thinking about entrepreneurship, including the ability to make more money, have more control of your time and have more flexibility, have the opportunity to innovate. Maybe there's something that you are very excited about to pilot and to try on. There's the opportunity to create new jobs, and really there's opportunities to do maybe what you've always wanted to be doing for a living. And so this is the reason to think about entrepreneurship as an opportunity to be able to make money. And this is for an opportunity for anyone, regardless of immigration status. And what's most important to understand about entrepreneurship is that it's not employment. And so the way you can think about entrepreneurship, you can approach it in lots of different ways. One way is to think about entrepreneurship as the opportunity to work for yourself, which could involve some independent contracting opportunities, some professional consulting if you have a specific expertise, even occasionally participating in the gig economy. And this area of work really does not involve you necessarily incorporating as a business. Now, you can also think of yourself, if you're ready to think of yourself as a business, where you would actually think about incorporating, and there are lots of different ways to incorporate. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's lots of different ways to approach it depending on your level of readiness. And to also make this a little bit more approachable, we like to sort of talk about entrepreneurship within this context of the undocu hustle. Many of you may actually already be engaging in entrepreneurship, or maybe your family members or maybe your neighbors have been engaging in entrepreneurship without even realizing that it was entrepreneurship. So we can probably all think of multiple examples of family members, of neighbors selling food, cutting hair, providing mechanic services. It really is something that is very prevalent among the immigrant community, and it's something that we've all had to experience and do to be able to make a living. So this is actually something that is very inherent to us, that is something very natural for us to think of. We may just have not actually thought that we could actually incorporate as a business, that we could access capital, that we can get permits and licenses. And so to give you an idea of the number of undocumented entrepreneurs, you can see here it's estimated that there are over 800,000 undocumented entrepreneurs, which constitutes about 8% of the working age undocumented population in the United States, generating over $15 billion. So this is something, again, that is very natural to us, that is not a foreign activity. It's just a matter of sort of shifting that mindset that Estefania talked about and really believing that this is actually something that is very natural to us. And I will share some links here to an LA Times article that came out just a few months ago that featured the stories of several entrepreneurs that you may actually have heard of in the past, including individuals like Danae Joseph, who is a political strategist, Yosima Reyes, who is an acclaimed poet and playwright, among others. And really, the story behind this is that regardless of DACA, there are ways for us to continue to be able to thrive, not just survive in this country, but thrive through entrepreneurship. So that's what this story is all about. At Immigrants Rising, we also have been able to compile stories of the undocu hustle, and I won't have time to play this particular video, but I definitely encourage you to check out our website and listen to the stories of some of these amazing entrepreneurs. Some of you may be familiar with Armando Ibanez, who is the creator of Undocu Tales. There's actually a new season that just is about to come out in the next few days, but really the possibilities are endless. That's also something that is important to know about entrepreneurship, that it's not just sort of the people in the tech industry that are entrepreneurs. It really can be a variety of different activities that you can engage in as an entrepreneur, including a passion project that can turn into a very successful business, such as the film business that Armando is now an owner of. So we won't have too much time to do polling, but I will be asking some questions throughout, and I encourage you to add your responses in the chat. And I'd like to know, who are some entrepreneurs that you know of? And again, it could be yourself. This is also a great opportunity to market your business if you already have a business. This is a great opportunity to give some shout outs to family members, neighbors, friends that are entrepreneurs. And so now I'm going to go over a little bit about sort of why is entrepreneurship an option to consider. So many of you may be familiar with IRCA, which is a federal policy that passed in 1986 that adjusted the status of millions of undocumented individuals. What you may not know is that in 1986, as a result of IRCA, it basically also required for employers to verify employment status for individuals. So this basically mandated for employers to verify work authorization and Social Security numbers for individuals to be able to work as employees in this country. However, embedded in IRCA is an exception in that Form I-9, meaning work authorization Social Security number, is actually not required when engaging as an independent contractor or a business owner. It's a totally different process that I'll go over that basically now involves paying taxes. And this is generally just something that the US encourages historically. Business is encouraged, investment is encouraged in this country. And therefore, what the IRS cares about is whether or not individuals are paying for taxes. This is why there is a completely separate form that is completed called a W-9 form that is only for tax purposes. And the IRS also issues individual tax ID numbers to any foreigner who has a tax obligation in the United States. We've also learned that engaging in entrepreneurship can actually be advantageous for individuals who are looking to adjust their status, and that there is evidence that individuals were paying taxes. And just super quickly, I'm going to run through some of the differences for you all to start thinking about the differences between employment and entrepreneurship. So in employment, we typically think of writing a resume with past experience. In entrepreneurship, you really want to think about all the different activities that you've engaged in as more of a portfolio. With employment, typically you think of applying for a job, applying for an internship. With entrepreneurship, it's a little bit different in that you actually have to go out and look for clients, gigs, or different opportunities instead of applying for any job that comes your way. With an employment, you may be waiting for an interview or a job posting that aligns with your skills and abilities. As an entrepreneur, you really want to be ahead of the game and really contacting possible clients, sharing your skills and expertise. With employment, and this is definitely some of you that may be in college, maybe in school, you may be wanting to go to job fairs, and typically job fairs are going to have employment opportunities. As an entrepreneur, you're going to want to think of a list of individuals who may need your services or your skills. And in terms of the forms and the documentation that is required, in employment, it would require work authorization and a social security number. As an entrepreneur, you fill out the W-9 form, and you can use the individual tax ID number or a business number, which is called an employer identification number. Again, I won't have time to go into this into too much detail, but we have many more detailed resources in case you have more questions around sort of the differences between, for example, an independent contractor, an employee, and a business owner versus an employee as well. And so another question for you all to think about as you're listening to this presentation, can you think of some examples of how you can leverage some skills from a previous job, maybe from the classroom, that you can leverage as an entrepreneurship opportunity? Because really what you want to think of is really sort of shifting that mindset from applying to a job to really applying your skills and abilities as an entrepreneurship opportunity. Super briefly, I'll go over ITIN, social security numbers, and taxes, and that I know that there's typically a lot of questions around this topic. So what you need to know about the ITIN specifically is that the IRS issues this number regardless of immigration status, and it is used for tax reporting purposes. However, there are many other benefits to getting an ITIN, including being able to open a bank account and establish credit. You can also use this to report income as an independent contractor or a business owner, and you can also use this number to then be able to further incorporate and get your employer identification number. There are also several other state benefits. You may want to take a look at, specifically if you're not in California, at some of the benefits that you may be eligible. And typically they do require for individuals to have an ITIN and to have filed their taxes. Specifically for DACA recipients, I know there's a lot of concerns around the social security number, especially because the social security card specifically says not valid without work authorization. Regardless of what happens with DACA, that social security number will remain yours forever. Even in a possible adjustment of status, that will remain your number, and there is no reason to go back to getting an ITIN. At any point in time, you should either have one or the other. If you do not have a social security number, definitely you want to be getting an ITIN. If you have a social security number as a result of being a DACA recipient, that is the number you will keep. And say, for example, you lose the work authorization for whatever reason, you can continue to engage in some contracting opportunities or in business ownership with that social security number. Sort of IRS issues a social security number, ITIN. It's a very different thing to then think about work authorization. Now, unfortunately, the ITIN is not very easy to get. So it is a bit of a complicated application. It's something called a W-7 form, must be submitted with a federal income tax return. There are exceptions to that. You are required to provide original documentation. So this is an original passport, original birth certificate, unless you work with something that is called a certified acceptance agent or the IRS Taxpayer Assistance Center. So because it is not easy to sort of complete this documentation, we definitely recommend seeking your local certified acceptance agent or making an appointment with the IRS Taxpayer Assistance Center, because it's very nuanced. You may not have some of the original documentation that is needed. You may not have income to report. So it does get a little bit complicated, and we do suggest looking for help. There is, again, the acceptance agent program or VITA clinics that you may want to go to. We also have great resources. We do have an ITIN guide. We also have a separate webinar where Professor Francine Lipman, who is a professor of law, goes over the W-7 form. I'm also leaving here the latest webinar that was just done, and it's called Immigrants Tax Issues, that goes into much more detail about the ITIN that I definitely recommend that you all check out. And the whole point of getting an ITIN is that hopefully you will all engage in some kind of contracting, business, entrepreneurship opportunity, and you'll have to pay taxes. So it is very important to be thinking about taxes as you start thinking about entrepreneurship, because it is important to organize and be prepared. So unlike if you're working as an employee, there's employer withholding. So if you have ever worked as an employee, you know that you don't get your full check. Some of it goes toward taxes. As an entrepreneur, you have to be responsible for paying those taxes. So you do have to put aside some amount of money. Typically, we recommend about 25% of your income. And then whereas employees receive W-2s to work for work done as an employee, entrepreneurs receive 1099s. This is for independent contractors, business owners, which is then the form that you submit to report your taxes. You will get a 1099 for any income that you received over $600. So if you have multiple clients, you may get multiple 1099s, and it's all of those that you would submit to file your taxes. However, as an entrepreneur, you can deduct business expenses. So again, I won't go into too much detail, and these kind of conversations you definitely want to have with a trusted tax preparer who understands taxes for business. We recommend definitely keeping your business receipts with clear notes, clear details about how it's related to the business. And we also recommend using apps like Foreseat or QuickBooks or some other app to keep you organized, because this is definitely something that I myself, when I first started with contracting, didn't really understand what I was doing. And it took a few years to actually figure out how to stay organized and how to budget properly to be able to have that amount of money to pay for taxes. And again, none of this has anything to do with immigration status. It really is just about you learning to budget and learning to pay taxes on any income that you are receiving. And again, we have complete guides, resources, pre-recorded webinars that go into much more detail, both on accessing capital, on ITINs, on EINs, on filing taxes. We have many more resources that can help you learn a little bit more about all the different requirements. In this next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get started with entrepreneurship. So one of the things to consider when thinking about entrepreneurship is that it really is just one additional way for you to make money. There are lots of different ways to make money, and entrepreneurship can encompass a combination of, say, some gig work that you decide to do on the side. It could involve some professional consulting opportunities, depending on your education, skills, abilities that you're able to acquire. It could also turn into a formal business of some sort, again, depending on what it is that you're interested in doing. And maybe there are employment opportunities in the future, such as an opportunity like DACA that came along and ultimately was able to give work authorization to some individuals. So it's a matter of thinking about all the different possibilities that are out there for you to be able to generate income and make money. So it really, at the end of the day, is about leveraging your assets, and it can include any of the items listed here. It could be a particular skill, ability, your education that you pick up, whatever experience you may have, and this could include experience even in school that you acquire. It could include some certifications. Nowadays, there are so many different certifications that you can get for free online, lots of training that you can get also for free online that can also be turned into some type of entrepreneurship activity. And even some hobbies could actually be turned into entrepreneurship activities. I love sharing the story of my mom, who is a social media influencer. She loves to cook, started a social media channel, and now is actually doing really great and is very active on social media. So you never really know where these opportunities are going to come up. And then the next thing you will want to think about and do a little bit more research, and it doesn't come naturally, is for you to really do a little bit of research and exploration around sort of what does it mean to even incorporate as a business? Like, what is that? What is the difference between a sole proprietorship, partnership, C corporation? It does get a little bit nuanced, and it does require doing a little bit of research, specifically because business entity and incorporation is governed by the state. So especially those of you in different states, states, you're going to have to Google and research what is a sole proprietorship in New Jersey, what is it in New York, because it does vary across the state. And you really do want to understand at what point does it make sense for you to incorporate. And again, all of that really depends on your level of readiness and understanding of what it means to be an entrepreneur. I will share that there's a lot of support out there, especially local support. There's organizations like the Small Business Development Agencies that are all over the United States. And these are agencies where you can walk in and just ask questions around what it means to become an entrepreneur, what are the differences in business entity. So there is a lot of support out there. So also don't think that you have to do everything on your own and do all the research on your own. And we'll share a lot of resources at the end of this presentation. There are lots of benefits to starting a business. So again, you can think of sort of opportunities to work for yourself without incorporating as a business. But if you are sort of really wanting to take entrepreneurship seriously and incorporate as a business, there are lots of benefits, including the possibility for you to make more money. And this has to do with your ability to be able to go after larger contracts for yourself and your business. You can hire employees as part of the business. Also, you can create a layer of identity protection between you as an individual and the business. This is, for example, the whole point of a limited liability corporation, in that it limits your personal liability and it creates a distinction between you, yourself, and the business. You can access additional financial capital for a business in the form of business loans, business credit cards. You also have the ability to go after, again, larger, more competitive contracts once you are incorporated. And you have the opportunity to access more cost-effective benefits, such as cheaper health insurance premiums and even some retirement options. So again, another reason to sort of think about what does it feel like, what does it look like to really think of yourself as a business. Another thing you'll have to research and think about is the business permit. So depending on the kind of business you want to go into, you may actually need a business permit. For example, if you're interested in selling food, food actually requires a lot of different permits and licenses, and that is actually governed at the local level by your city or county. So again, this really does involve potentially going into City Hall and asking questions around what do you need to be able to establish X or Y business. Again, you may want to think about the business incorporation, and that's at the state level. Lastly, you may actually need a professional license to engage in a particular type of business, say, for example, hairstyling, real estate, accounting, and that's also at the state level. And you'll have to check in again with on the website to understand what you can actually be eligible for. Specifically, undocumented DACA recipients, it really does vary across states on what opportunities are available, specifically related to professional licensing. So to recap, to get started with entrepreneurship, we really do encourage you to learn the basics about entrepreneurship. It's not going to be enough to listen to this workshop and soak it all in. However, we do have, again, our Making Money page, and then Estefania will also talk a little bit more about our curriculum and on Spark. And then you really want to take an assessment of your skills, your experience, abilities. This is something that you really want to think for yourself, like, what am I good at? What have friends and family told me that I'm really good at? Maybe you're really good at computers and technology, and that's something that you'll want to explore a little bit deeper. Maybe you want to invest in some additional education or training or certification to boost your skill set. I always talk about, for example, the Google Analytics certificate, completely free. It has so many different amazing tools to help you learn about this whole concept of Google Analytics. That is something that every organization, every company is interested in. You can also do a little bit of exploration to think about what you might be interested in. And I do encourage using the website called Upwork as an exploration tool. You can add in keywords like writing, editing, math, analysis, technology. And how you can use this is that you can read through different profiles of individuals to learn how other individuals market their skills. That can give you some ideas about how much do people charge per hour to do a particular type of opportunity. A very common sort of first start with entrepreneurship translation. Translation services are needed all across the board. So in Upwork, you want to do translation and actually see how much people pay for these kind of services. The last step is really to write a business plan. The business plan or the business model canvas can really help you organize your thoughts and ideas. It can also help you think through doing a market analysis to understand what does it look like to be doing the kind of work you want to be doing. It'll also help you to think about the amount of money you may potentially need to invest in this business and how to market yourself. And again, we have lots of resources to help you think through a business plan or a business model canvas. And the whole point of our Spark curriculum actually leads into a business plan. So the question here, before I continue, are you all ready to get started with entrepreneurship? Hopefully, you're all at least a step closer into even considering or thinking about this option as an opportunity for yourselves. So hopefully in the chat, I will see a lot of yeses as yes, you are ready to at least consider, at least explore more about what entrepreneurship is all about. And before I hand it over to Estefania, those of you joining us in California, I do want to make sure that you all are aware of some very important policies. First one, SB 1159, really amazing opportunity for any of you who are looking to get a professional license. You may be surprised in that many industries actually require a professional license. And in the state of California, we're very fortunate that anyone, regardless of immigration status, can get these licenses. So definitely encourage you to check this out. I will say it's a little bit nuanced and complicated, and let us know, reach out to us. We are in the process of trying to understand professional licensing a little bit more. Those of you not in California, one, there are opportunities to engage in advocacy. This is definitely an area that I think is very popular right now, to be able to encourage your state to allow anyone, regardless of immigration status, to get professional licensing. And there is actually a map where I have been keeping track here and there of the professional licenses across other states. In California, we also have AB 2184 that allows anyone, regardless of status, to apply to a business license or a business tax certificate. This basically creates a blanket law that individuals, regardless of status, cannot get discriminated against when they're interested in applying for a business license. Again, individuals in other states, great opportunity to use this as a model to be able to pass similar legislation in other states. Lastly, I won't go into too much detail, but we do have in California AB 5, which is a law that is intended to ensure that individuals are categorized properly. And this has to do in that, unfortunately, there are employers that exploit individuals by misclassifying them. And what you need to know about this, especially when you think about independent contracting opportunities, is that you really want to ensure for yourself that you're actually engaging in independent contracting opportunities and not employee-like opportunities. Again, we have a lot more detailed information about this, but you do want to be aware that AB 5 is really ensuring that individuals are properly categorized. So you yourself want to make sure that you are engaging in the correct type of work. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Estefania, who is going to talk a little bit more about our SEED initiative, which we are very excited about.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Ileana. Happy to share about this initiative. And right before I get into the initiative, something I will share with all of you, and I've been seeing in the chat, one person asked about what degree you need to be able to do entrepreneurship, and just kind of my sense about some folks as they enter this idea of starting their own business. I'm going to speak to confidence, and that, like, if I had a magic wand, and I'll just pretend I have one, like, the one thing I would give you is for you to get that the skills you have and what you possess right now is perfect for you to start considering yourself to be someone that can run your own business, even potentially as an independent contractor as a start, which is where the entrepreneurship curriculum starts with, having you begin to open your mind about what you can do. And for so long, our training in the academic system, it's like employee-based, right? We get into school, we get out, like there's all of this that is more around being an employee. And so that magic wand that I would have would be for you to know you and what you possess right now is exactly perfect. And you don't really need more to start, but as you start, you will acquire more knowledge, skills. It'll happen in the journey versus you needing to get all the skills already to start. So that's where the seed initiative comes, because it's a beginning, and it doesn't expect you to already be a professional business owner, if that even exists, right? So what the seed initiative is that we're disbursing grants for entrepreneurs, as in potentially you. Developing businesses is someone who's just starting. You have a business idea, or you just started the business and it's generating some revenue, but not over $100,000 in revenue. It's generating less than that. You would be eligible for a $5,000 grant. And mature businesses over $100,000 in revenue would be eligible for a $10,000 grant. And this is particular to California residents. The fund came from California, and so it's particular to California residents. If you're here and you're like, well, I don't live in California, for this particular initiative, you're not eligible for, right? But the seed grant. But what we want is for you to open thinking of like, what if there was more like this, right? It starts with advocacy. It starts with being able to promote and have people know that you exist, that people want to develop these kinds of businesses, that we already do support the economy in this way, and starting to open something like this elsewhere can open up, right? And then through the seed initiative, people are provided technical assistance. And then we have actually already opened applications, and people can begin to participate and submit the grant. I'm going to go ahead and need the website and know how to navigate that. And so that's what I will share next. Let me just share. Perfect, this right here. So it's spark.immigrantsrising.org, and you're gonna see two potential places that you can click: apply for seed funds or access the entrepreneurship curriculum, the entrepreneurship training. If you're someone who lives in California and you'd like to apply for seed funds, you can click here. But if you're someone who wants to get the training, wants to learn more about how to develop your own business, wants to get to the point where you have a business plan after completing the curriculum, you can access the training here directly. So you just click here and access all of the training material and everything you need to go through what it takes to start a business, marketing and promotion, and business structure and permits. I saw some of those kinds of questions in the chat, and finance and capital, etc. If you're someone who lives in California and you'd like to apply for the seed grants, or even just learn more about the seed grant, you would click here, and that would take you to our seed funding page, where you can learn a lot more around seed in particular. We have already done this and given, like it says here, $3.9 million. And we have a lot of people that we funded from so many businesses. I mean, just across the market, so many folks. And then we go into the eligibility. So to be eligible, you would be a non-US citizen or lawful permanent resident. And this includes undocumented individuals, someone who has DACA or TPS, and then limited English proficiency, regardless of immigration status. So if someone's a citizen and they have limited English proficiency, they would be eligible. I went into the types of grants, and then the application deadlines are also here. And you can access those things by going into the websites. There's a couple of aspects to this. This is why it's best to go into the site. That's where you're going to find the most information that you need if you're actually someone who wants to consider this. And this will take you through what it entails to get to the point where you would actually register. You would read through this, right? Because we love reading. Yes. And then you would click here to actually open up an account and register so that you can access the seed grant. And so those are the details of the seed grant. And we're just really excited to open this up. Can you apply to both? Someone's asking if you can apply to both. It's one seed grant, like for the $5,000 or the $10,000, you would submit one application, submit all of the documentation, and then we would tell you if you were eligible for 5K or 10K. But primarily you would go based on the threshold. If you have revenue under 100,000, you would apply for the $5,000. If you have revenue over 100,000, you can apply for the $10,000. So those are the details about the seed grant. I don't see any other questions, but we're excited. I'll go ahead and make the post, put the links in the chat. It is only available for California residents. I do see all of that there.
Thank you, Estefania. And again, even though this is currently only an opportunity in California, we encourage you to reach out to us if you're in a different state or are interested in engaging in some advocacy efforts, because this is something that we would love to see across other states. These kind of opportunities are exactly what is needed for the immigrant community. So if you are interested, I know I've been in conversations with folks in Chicago who are definitely interested in a program like this. So we are happy to share more information about the advocacy side of things if that's something that you are interested in.
Yes, and I did get someone did ask if we're going to host teach-ins. We are going to host, we call them Spark Academy. So we will be hosting a series of Spark Academies so that people can be walked through this process together.
Great. Thank you, Estefania. And I am going to close out here just with some information and resources, and definitely want to leave some time with some more Q&A at the end here. So to conclude here, the presentation, again, all of the information that is shared with much more detail is available on our Making Money landing page. You can see here we have a full income generation webinar series that consists of an in-depth workshop around how to build your entrepreneurship mindset, how to start a business. It features a lot of different entrepreneurs that share their experiences. Definitely encourage you to check out, for example, the 5 tips to get started as an independent contractor. We have a brainstorming worksheet to help you think through the questions that you need to get started, and many more resources. So this is the best place to get access to our resources. For any educators that are joining us today, we do have something called our entrepreneurship lesson plan. If you're interested in learning how to share this information out with your students, this lesson plan walks you through, including a script, links, stories, videos to share so that you can host your own entrepreneurship workshop at your campus. So definitely encourage you to check that out. And then I know Krishna mentioned this, but tomorrow, the legal services team at Immigrants Rising is going to be doing this webinar, Getting a Permanent Employment-Based Green Card. You can register online. We've been sharing the link throughout the presentation. You can also find the information on our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, but this is taking place tomorrow. And with that, we can open it up for questions. If you all have any questions specifically related to entrepreneurship, to our seed grant, you can email us at entrepreneurship@immigrantsrising.org. We do have a listserv that you can sign up for, and you can also join our Facebook group called Entrepreneurs at Immigrants Rising, where we share information and resources if you are interested in learning more about this topic. So thank you all for joining, for sticking around, and the last few minutes we'll spend some time answering any questions that have come in.
Yeah, and I can go ahead and get us started because I know there are a lot of questions. I think first of all, I saw a lot of questions that are very case specific. And so just wanted to let you know that unfortunately it's just very hard to answer those kinds of questions because it really depends on the facts. So I encourage you to talk to an immigration attorney to sit down with you and to like really go through your case. And in the slides, we have a few links on ways to get legal support. But if you go to Immigrants Rising's website, they have a legal intake, and you could submit information about your case and they can get back to you. I also saw a lot of questions about the DREAM Act. Or what's happening in Congress. So there are a few bills that have been introduced in Congress. But as far as whether they're moving or not, unfortunately, we haven't really seen much traction. Who knows what would happen if DACA does end at a certain point, whenever that is. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more pressure for Congress to do something There's also someone mentioned, can the Biden administration introduce a new program that's not DACA in case DACA ends? And the answer is yes. And that's also other advocacy that's happening. Just these past few days, there were a lot of law professors who created a letter basically encouraging the Biden administration to create another program to allow folks to be eligible for what's called deferred and forced departure. So it's similar to deferred action, but it's different. It's also something that the administration has the power to do. So there is advocacy around that. There are also questions around advance parole. I saw a lot of them around, is there a limit to how many times you can travel on advance parole? There's no limits. You can continue to travel and apply if you want. You can also, in your application, ask for multiple entries if you need to. You really have to make the case that you have to come back and forth to be able to get those types of grants, but we have seen them. The most common, for example, is a student. We've seen this with students who are studying abroad and want to have advanced parole, and they know that there's certain, like a break, like a spring break or holidays in between their schools abroad, and they want to be able to come back to the country to spend the holidays with their family members and then go back to their studies abroad. So it could happen. You have to make the case that you have to be able to come back and forth to seek multiple entries. As far as length of travel, there's no specific requirement. You just, again, have to make the case that, if you're visiting a family member, that you need X amount of time to be able to do that. So it really is case specific, but generally speaking, they're not going to grant anything over a year, and even a year is like a lot. You really have to make the case that you need X amount of time for your purpose. Leona and Stefania, do y'all see any questions? There's a few questions for you all too.
I'm looking. The access of the copy of the presentation slides. Yes, we'll share those.
And Stephanie, do you want to share about the link that you just posted about the info sessions?
Yes, perfect. So we'll do that. So I just shared, I'll go ahead and copy this again, a link for info sessions. I know that it just takes something to grasp what it takes to apply for this, for anything, scholarships, anything, right? Specifically around the seed grant, I went ahead and created a series of info sessions. So that we really dive deep into specifically the seed grant, what it entails, what it takes to apply, and you can ask all and any question you have about that. If you really have a pressing question, feel free to email entrepreneurship@immigrantsrising.org. But generally, attending one of those live will get you what you need. The deadline to apply is May 15th. And so May 15th at 5 p.m. And so, I would definitely encourage you to participate in one of these grant info sessions. They're happening between March 30th and April 10th. So towards the beginning of the application process, so that you can get what you need and decide for yourself if you'd like to move forward with that application.
Yeah, I'm also seeing more questions about advance parole, questions about when do you recommend us waiting for this judge to decide, since it's going to come up soon after April 6th. Yeah, I mean, it depends on you, like I think obviously each person should make their own decision, but I think to be on the safer sides, especially since a decision is about to come out, um, you might want to wait to see if he continues to allow folks to have DACA while the appeal is pending, if there is an appeal, or which most likely there will be, just to be on the safe side. um I mean, the chances of the judge saying that, even if there is an appeal, that he's gonna not allow the government to continue receiving renewals are very low, I would say, but you never know. It's up to the judge's decision. I mean, he decided to allow for renewals to happen the first time. And it's the same judge, so we're guessing he's going to decide this way. But yeah, if you want to be on the safe side, maybe you want to wait. Um, as far as processing time, how long it's taking to process advance parole requests. So there's two different processes. The general process it's taking around 3 to 4 months is what we're hearing for DACA folks. Um, but there is a special process if you need to apply on an emergency reason. So meaning that your travel is within 90 days. If it's within 90 days, you can actually call USCIS, their contact number, and go into a local office to take your application, and they would review it there in person and approve it or not. So, but yeah, generally, if you're not going through that process, it'll take around 3 to 4 months to process.
I also see a question around, will applying for the seed grant sooner get you an answer sooner? We do have a priority deadline. I believe it's May 10th. It's a few days before May 15th as a priority deadline, but it does not necessarily mean we're going to give you a response sooner because you've applied sooner. And then there's a series of more questions. I know some of these are very specific, like you're saying, Krishna. Some people are asking around just traveling right now in April. Is there anything you can speak to around that?
Oh, I applied for IP and I should know by minutes for a 2-month period. Yeah, I mean, I think once again, like it depends on you. Most likely we might know by then, by the time you need to travel. But yeah, there's no really one way to predict what's gonna happen. But the most likely scenario is that you're gonna be allowed to return even if you go on your Advance Parole trip. I mean, I don't want to guarantee it, but say in the worst case scenario, DACA does end while you're traveling. Um, Most likely they're going to wind down the program within 2 years, which is what I mentioned. So you'll be able to come back in worst case scenario. But of course, you can't guarantee that. But that's likely what will happen.
Great. And then what if I've lost my employment authorization card? Should I still apply for AP if I'm willing and able? There's a question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for those folks, I mean, there's not a requirement that you need your original EAD to travel. Obviously, they're probably going to ask you more questions at the border, and I think at the very least, having your approval notice for your DACA. But if you can, I mean, if you have the money and you can, I would say the safest route would be to get a replacement EAD. But if not, yeah, I would talk to an attorney and just see if you have the approval notice for your DACA and a copy of your EAD. I think that should be sufficient for you to be able to travel. But yeah, you're probably going to be asked more questions at the border.
Great. Can we please kindly get a copy of the slides? Yes, I'm checking that one. Yes. There's a lot of questions around how long the process takes. You may have already answered that, Krishna, but just people are wondering how long advance parole process takes.
Yeah, so once again, to process the application for advance parole, it takes about 3 to 4 months right now, from what we're seeing. Well, if you do have to travel before then, there is a process to call USCIS. If it's within 90 days or less, you can take your application in the office, in the field office, and the appointment should be pretty quickly, and you can get an approved right there and then in person. As far as how long to ask for, once again, it depends on your purpose for traveling. So if you need 4 months, like you really have to just show that the reason why you're traveling requires the 4 months of you being out. And I also saw a bunch of questions about like people who weren't sure and they named, to me, it sounds like good reasons, like a teacher, for example, who is traveling to Spain through their school. I mean, that sounds like a humanitarian and an educational reason to me. Someone who wants to go on a mission through the church. They said that an attorney told them that they had to show ties to the church. I mean, for DACA purposes, generally, there's not a requirement. I think if you can fit it under like, this is valuable to the person and it's a humanitarian reason because it's cultural, etc. But there's not a, for example, if I wanted to go to a mission through a Catholic church, I'm not Catholic, but I think I can make the case that it would fall under one of the 3 reasons. But yeah, you should talk to an attorney probably another attorney in this case to get more information.
Great. There's 2 other questions that I think would be relevant. Ileana, there's one around how do you establish credit with an ITIN?
That's a great question. So this is one of the benefits of getting an ITIN is that you can go to a financial institution. It could be a national bank, a local bank, a credit union, and apply for your first credit card. And that's how you start building credit or anything that you purchase on credit. And of course, we advise to be smart about accessing credit, making sure that you are paying off the money that you are requesting, but that's how you can build credit.
Great, thank you. There's another question, Krishna. What's the deadline to file for U visa after the incident?
Yeah, there's like no specific timeline. So like the crime could have happened many years ago. So there's no timeline on that. Of course, there's like more requirements to be eligible for a U visa. So you have to show, for example, that you suffered some kind of trauma, and you have to show that you either mental or physical abuse. So there's more requirements, but in terms of when the crime happened, there isn't one. So some people have been able to successfully file for a U visa, even though the crime happened a long, long time ago.
Great. And then a question again for Ileana, what's a good way to check your credit if you have it with an ITIN?
That's a good question. We do have a full guide all around building credit and accessing capital that I'm happy to share the link. But generally, your credit is managed by credit bureaus that keep track of your spending habits. So they would be the best place to take a look at that. Another important part about building credit on an ITIN is that if you are able to get a social security number down the road, you can actually pass over your credit history from your ITIN to your social security number. So it's never too late to get started. And I will link our resource specifically around building credit.
Great. And then there's another question, Krishna. My uncle in Ghana is turning 90 in August. Would that work for a humanitarian process for advance parole?
I think that's one of the very case-specific questions. I
Sure.
mean, it really depends on the facts of the case, like how ill they are. And it also depends on the officer. I think generally speaking, most people have, I have heard of people being able to get approved for advance parole that if they're visiting someone in their family that's not an immediate relative, meaning like their parent, spouse, or or something like that. So it can happen. I think once again it's case specific, but yeah, I think like for example, if the uncle means a lot to you and you have ties to them and you can show that, and they're ill and you can show letters from a hospital, for example, I think you can make the case. But yeah, I would encourage you to speak to an attorney who can sit down with you to analyze your facts.
Great. There's a question if we have any resources on immigration lawyers to recommend for people to begin advance parole.
Yes, so I'm gonna write in the chat this website, immigrationlawhelp.org, where you can use that to find a local nonprofit that supports with immigration cases. You can just type in your zip code using that website and it will show you your local nonprofits. And so that's one way to try to find legal support and to talk to an attorney about your case, including if you're applying for advance parole.
Great. And we have 1 more minute. I think we can just kind of begin to say goodbye and thank you. I'll start. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And then Krishna and then Diana.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much for being here. I think this was a pleasure. I always love being in these spaces and I always love collaborating with Immigrants Rising. And yeah, look out for the recording and the PowerPoint that will be shared with you all.
Yes, much appreciation to everybody who joined and definitely much appreciation to ILRC. Thank you so much, Krishna, for extending an invitation to partner on this webinar. And generally, the message is that there are options. We know that it is scary to think about the possibility of DACA going away, that it is really upsetting for individuals who are eligible for DACA and are currently not eligible to apply. But hopefully, now that you've heard this information, there's still a lot of information and resources to access that you don't have to wait for DACA to come around. So good luck to everybody and thank you.
Thank you all. Learned so much. Love the support in the chat. And I was definitely taking notes. Thank you.
Thank you all.